The two Jills, a psychologist and psychic intuitive, reveal mind-blowing insights that turn psychology, self-help, and conscious teachings on their heads. Why? Because they work. Real help, sincere growth is here. Welcome to Psyched.
Welcome. Today's episode is Beyond the Past. Hi, Jill. How are you today?
I am doing awesome today. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Me too. So, what do you want to talk about? Do you want to kick us off here about Beyond the Past?
Yes, I think this is a great topic. I love talking about the past in a way that helps people see the past differently. I think you and I both love to do this. And I think that for many of us, the past can kind of haunt us, right? So I think this topic is just very, what would I say? It's kind of seminal in understanding what the past is, kind of leaving it where it belongs, using it when it's beneficial to us, and not more than that.
I love it. There's a lot of, I think everybody, all of us have something about our past that does haunt us. And that doesn't have to be a problem though, because we aren't our past. We're not even what we were in the past. So there's this like present day punishment of maybe what we were in the past or maybe what somebody else was in the past. And it feels like there's no room for growth and transcendence and things like that. And I feel like that really consumes a lot of our energy, this kind of holding ourselves accountable for what we were before, or pretending, Jill, like we can't be more than we were before, and not giving ourselves the full credit for any transformation, growth, evolution that we've created in our lives. We are capable of dramatic change every day that is almost disconnected from our past and what we were yesterday.
I think that's perfectly said, because one of the things that catches me up when I watch my brain is this idea of the brain is looking at sameness. And if you start to train it to literally say, I am a different person than I was just yesterday. Just yesterday, I was a different person than I am today. And that, I think, can start to train us in the direction of having a lot more fluidity, right, with our identities and those fixed parts of us, and use time really to our benefit in that way.
I love it.
I mean,
When you
it's
add in
logical.
yeah. When you add in the authority piece of there's a lot of excuses we make of, oh, that's just the way I am, but that's based on this history dragging into the present. And it tends to be used more in an excusing, sort of like coming up with excuses. Oh, I tangled my words there. Coming up with excuses for why we aren't what we wish we could be, or why we're not what somebody else wants us to be. So we have these ideas that, well, I am just this way, but oh my God, could you get any more limiting? Because I think the on-ramp to freedom there is, but do you want to be that way? Right? Do you want to be another version of yourself? And you don't find a new version of yourself, you make a new version of yourself, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
And it's
is
fun.
perfect. It
It's
can
fun
be
because
fun.
it can be fun to be curious about what else you're capable of beyond that limiting sense of who you are, right? I have so many examples of ways that I used to be that I'm like, oh my God, I'm so glad it's not about outgrowing it so much as I created new layers of me that weren't that way. And I like being
Yeah,
this Jill better.
I agree. I feel like my statement is, when I work with people, I just say the only reason to look backward is to see how far you've come.
Mm.
Right? That to me it's kind of what you're saying. It's like, look at all these extra layers. Look at all this good stuff that I could, or that I do have going on. In a lot of respects, the past keeps us from recognizing, honestly, maybe that we're already where we want to be. That's how limiting that can be. it will actually stop you. And a good litmus test for this is other people a lot of times think more of you or more of your accomplishments or more of what you've done than you do. And it's because we're anchored in the past in that way, and we don't have a good vantage point for ourselves. We're not the best, when the past is anchored there, we're not the best judge of ourselves.
So true. I'm just realizing as you're saying that, Jill, there's a whole other part of this that I want to offer up. Is the past even what we think it is? Right? Human memories are highly flawed, and lawyers will tell you this, right? I love this example of if you and two people that you love and admire and respect are standing on the same street corner and an accident happens in front of you, you will each, three of you, have a very different or at least distinctive version of what happened. And you were all there. All three of you were there at the same time, right? Especially if nobody's looking at your phone, it's an even better test. But oh my God, the ability for the mind to fill in blanks, the ability for the brain to add details that were never there. We do that in the past. Another example I like to use is just ask your family, well, tell me about the Christmas that we had and you were all there or Hanukkah, right? Whatever celebration, so whatever family holiday where you were all there, what happened in that time? You will all have a completely different story of what happened that day, right? So what's correct? What's accurate? So the fact that not only is our past dramatically influencing who and what we are now and what we consider ourselves capable of going forward, it's also possibly highly inaccurate, especially if we're hard on ourselves. Our version of how we're suffering more or what we had to put up with. Or, oh my God, they were horrible. It's like, but were they really horrible?
Yeah, me and my siblings have completely different versions of our youth. And I find it fascinating. And so a lot of times it is very fun to just go and ask somebody about a common experience, because you do see it from totally different places, and you run on this interpretation that you actually saw it the same. So it doesn't come to light, all of these flawed things, because there are so many assumptions, just so many assumptions that the brain makes to sort of compile it into a memory and then create it as part of your foundational identity. When I hear people say that experience, yes, or it made me who I am, I'm like, it's sort of a little, let's think about that for a minute. I don't know if it made you who you are. It's just something to think about,
Right. And I don't want to pull the rug out from anyone, That, yeah. So what did you just say? I interrupted you. There's a lot of pieces at work.
I was just, no. I said, just hold on to the pieces that work, the identity strengtheners, right? Not the identity, like you say, the detractors or the limitations or the excuses for, why you don't see yourself as where you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. This whole freedom from our past, in a way, I find so liberating that your past doesn't have to mean what you have pretended it meant. It may not even, like we were just introducing, it may not even be as accurate as your brain has been telling you it is. Our memories of other people are sometimes too forgiving or too harsh, right? And the same thing of ourselves. So we may not be as accurate in that way as well, or fair. It gets complicated though, because so many people, their sense of identity is where they're from and what they've experienced. And I feel like that's not as liberated as it could be, because yes, you are the person that experienced those things, but you're also the person that is deciding every day what that means to you. And that's where your authority is. What does that mean to you, if anything? I had a fascinating conversation with a client recently that she said, I keep coming across this issue where I meet somebody or I hear about somebody's story and I actually experienced my own version of that same trauma. And I always felt like, oh, that was just a screwed up situation. And it, she said, Jill, I feel like unharmed in many ways by that shitty situation that happened on that day. She said, but I know other people that they describe it exactly as I know what happened to me, and they're still feeling traumatized and violated and all these things. And it was so interesting, her sense of, is it possible that somebody can experience the same thing and have a very recoverable sort of reaction to it of, okay, this is bad, but I think we're okay. I think we're going to be okay, right? Without it feeling like it's a limiter for the rest of your life. And I loved the idea that she was acknowledging that she is allowing almost naturally a transcendent interpretation that, yes, that happened to her, but that isn't who and what she is. She isn't over
Right.
identifying with that experience. But I don't want to, I'm not trying to blame anyone that is feeling literally traumatized still to this day of something serious that happened to them yesterday or, 50 years ago. That's real too. I just like the range of choices that we have that sometimes aren't presented to us.
Yes. And I think the range of choice is important because that's your only way out, right? That's the only way out of your interpretation. And the question is, do you want a way out? I've seen people also in my work and, just people I know who organize themselves around these experiences, around these negative experiences. It's almost like that is their identity. And there's a very organizing principle to it. And that's something that we can ask ourselves. Am I organized around pain? Right? That's just something to take stock of. Is my identity organized around pain? Because that's when the choice comes. And then the question is, do I want to organize around pain? There is no judgment in doing it. It is a very common brain situation to say, that was bad. 8-year-olds, they would say a lot of times when I was, studying in school, they would say, if something happens to you when you're around 8 years old, the state of development you're in at that point is something that internalizes, it must be something I did. So if parents are fighting, the kid automatically assumes, because of their relationship to the world, it's so egocentric, we say, right, that they are the ones that caused that relationship problem or caused that breakup. And if you carry that forward, if you get a lot of reinforcement in that area, that, yeah, it is your fault, and then you carry that inclination forward, a lot of times it could seem like either you deserved it or there was something about you that brought this on. And that's hard to move out of, right? And so understanding that maybe at a certain point, whenever this happened to you, you could have been in a very receptive place to have this hit you really, really hard. And then now is the time to say, that hit me hard then because of where I was then. And then keep the past in the past and say, you know what? And then do what the person you suggested do. Say, you know what? That was an event. That was an event. And that event happened. And I don't have to keep organizing my identity around that event. Does that make sense?
It's perfect. It's perfect because it's almost like a smothering blanket in a way. Like you said, there's no way out. There's nowhere to go from there because the identity is so intrinsically tied not only to an event, but to a bad event versus a good event,
Yeah.
right? Somebody could just as easily, logically, any event has weight, right? But obviously bad events have a different storage, meaning in our system. But I love what you're saying here. The ability to be curious about how we identify ourselves based on our past, based on our experiences, based on what we had or didn't have, right? is a huge knob to really play with because there's so much authorship there / authority.
Yeah. And I think the brain
huge.
has a program that really brings us into, and it's a program my brain runs a lot. It's like this damage program. It says the past happened and there's nothing you can do about it. That is fundamentally untrue. It is absolutely untrue. So it's not that we have to go change the past, but the past didn't create, I don't allow the program to run where there's permanent damage, right? And that's the helplessness program, which is, and it's reinforced by comparing yourself to other people, right? Saying, well, they didn't have this and they're happier, right? And because I had it, that's the end. And there's no sort of fixing it. There's no healing. It's sort of like giving yourself up to your fate.
That's good. So I think I hear you saying that it's not that we can change the past, but we can change what it means to us today.
Yes. Yeah, no,
Okay.
there's no reason to change the past. It's done.
No. Yeah.
The event is done. The story we told ourselves about the event and about ourselves because of that event is all malleable. That's all fluid. And one of the reason why we're talking about that is because people don't realize that. They don't realize how flexible the past is. You know, it's kind of like the epigenetics we're learning about. I mean, it's been around for a while now, but even the DNA isn't fixed, right? And so we're learning things that we thought were just set in stone. And to your point, memory is just a compilation of different things that glom together like a snowball. But each time we go to that memory, we pull different things into it. There's no memory in our brain. It's just the brain pulling together all of these ideas and emotions and coming out with this
filling
output.
in holes.
Filling in holes, as
and
you
filling
said.
in gaps on its own without your awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the danger zone, right?
Totally. And that's where some, an outside objective person is so helpful, but sometimes that's not possible. But you and I have had these conversations just in our own, friendship and relationship that we all have a story, but for God's sake, pick a good one. If your story is prevent, everybody has a story. We all have a narrative. We all have an interpretation of who and what we are. And maybe that is partly related to the past or partly related to our gifts or whatever. But just pick a good one. And what I mean by that is pick a story that helps you be your best you versus makes that harder. I don't understand. To me, it feels totally illogical once you realize you do have authorship over that story, that narrative, that personal story, when it's that why it's harder for you to be a better version of you. That makes no sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. I always say to people, like, if we talked about beliefs a little bit, in another episode, but if you have a belief, so a lot of people come to me with the spiritual aspects and they talk about, and you get it too, right? The belief in the afterlife. And I've literally had people say to me, I don't believe in the afterlife. And I'm like, why wouldn't you? What's the downside? There's literally no downside in believing something else is there for us, right? Because if you die and there's nothing, then you don't know it. And if you get there, then you're just like, great. But the brain creates downsides to these beliefs because either it doesn't want to be wrong or it doesn't want to, go against whatever beliefs are and the people around them. And so it's the same thing. We're creating these beliefs about the world we live in. We're making them up. Make up good ones. We're making up the stories about who we are and how we got here and what were the things that formed our narrative. but we're choosing those pieces amidst gabillions amount of data. And we're hanging on to what? 3 or 4 stories? It's a very limited construction of the cell, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
It's
And
just,
I think of in psychology self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
yeah.
With self-fulfilling prophecy, but that made as children, right, when we didn't feel like, oh, I don't know if I get to disagree with the math teacher, my elementary school teacher, that I'm bad at math or something like that, or that I'm great at math, whatever.
Yeah.
That's one thing. But then as an adult to still carry on those stories, it's just like, is it even true? Is it serving you? Is it even true? And is it doing, do you want to be telling yourself that story anymore? Because they run deep within ourselves.
And let me say also, and I've seen this a lot in the work that I do, is that story can help them to a certain point, right? So if they feel like they've survived something that was bad, even if they didn't like the way they behaved or the influence that it had on them, there's certain traction that they're going to get from just having been through it. And that empowers, they can use that negative fuel in a way, for lack of a better word. I don't like saying negative, but they can use that fuel, that pain, to motivate themselves. But at a certain point, that pain is going to become a limiter. And that's when you want to see if it's gotten to that point where it's no longer serving you as a story, and then think about updating the narrative for sure. So like, yeah, so just to repeat, there is something that can be in service, but you want to be empowered by the other side. If you want to go toward a more transcendent level on this, you don't want to be propelled by pain. You want to be through that, beyond that, and be propelled by, yeah, been there, done that. That has no bearing on me anymore. Like, that's history. And let it be
Beautiful.
history.
I have seen in my client work where individuals are trying to get rid of a reaction they have to their past. They're trying to get rid of anger, maybe towards parents that they felt were, did them a disservice or whatever. So they keep trying to figure out a way to get rid of it. And to me, that isn't transcendence, that's denialism. And I don't recommend that approach. I'm curious for your strategies on this. But the strategy that I like to offer is, it's almost like imagining that there is some sort of a sense of self that is multiple, right? So whether it's I love an a beautiful executive conference room table, and there's a seat at the table for even the version of, in that instance of that person, the version of you that's angry and feels like you were like you had an unfair deal related to her parents, right? So you have a seat at the table for that version of you that feels something very unfair and unjust happened to you. And you don't try to get rid of her. You don't ask her to go away. You literally, she gets a prize seat at the table, just like all the other layers of you, because she's not going away. And to ask her to go away is to ask her to deny that of her reality, right? Her experiences, and that doesn't work. So by bringing her in and then you giving her, you as maybe a bigger version of you, that can give that layer of you the compassion, the words that you would say to a child, that's not fair. You didn't deserve that. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Then that layer of you gets the love and attention in a really healthy way that she's deserved and maybe has been looking for her whole life, possibly in the wrong places. By getting it from you, it's a healthier system of yourself. Jill, what do
I
you
love
recommend for somebody that's been trying to get rid of? Is that one works? Yeah, I've seen it work
It
so
works
well
really,
in
really
so many
well, because
instances.
I think it works really well because a lot of times the real issue does come down to us not honoring us. It's not so much what other people do to us. It's a matter of, do we have our own back? And a lot of times we go to other people to tell our story so that they have our back. If you don't add yourself in the way that you just described, if you don't add yourself to having your own back, it almost doesn't work, right? Because it keeps in a weird way, it keeps you from honoring you. And then I think just cutting across all the work that we do, I don't like going into, you have to love yourself more. And it is cliche, and it's hard to really know how to do that. But are you, like, sometimes I sit and I'm like, am I a good friend to me? Am I like treating myself well here? And you're right. You can't lop off pieces of yourself. You don't need to lop off an experience to have a different relationship to that experience. But it does change with you changing your relationship to yourself. And the way you suggest is a beautiful way to do that, because everybody gets a seat at the table and nobody's seat is better or worse or judged, right? The self-judgment piece, that is a real way to dishonor yourself. Like, there's no comparing yourself to other people, a huge way to dishonor yourself. The things that we do just very naturally are very dishonoring and dismissive of us.
Okay. Jill, when I hear somebody say, because I do see this a lot in my client work or even just in friendships and adult relationships, that it's almost like people that seem like they're having a harder life, their sense is that they're for some reason having a hard time in this reality and they're not sure why. They look to this kind of deep, dark closet of, did something happen to me? Am I missing something? Is there some hidden, skeleton in the closet that I can't see? And I think of like repressed memories. Repressed memory kind of categories fit in that. As a psychologist, what is your sense of that?
I am not a fan of digging in the dark, right? The repressed memories have been debunked in a lot of ways. They really come from a misunderstanding of what we were talking about, how the brain makes stuff up. If you go digging in there, you will find something. I promise you will find something. It's not necessary to go and do that. And this is a big break that I have from psychology personally, because the more I dug in there, the deeper in I got. And I realized, that I'm not getting out of there. I'm definitely not getting out of there. So I don't think we need to go into the past to figure out what's going on right now. I think we can look at what's going on right now in a way that says, okay, here I am. I don't care how I got here. What do I want to do? I don't care. My brain went kaflooey at some point. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me how I got here. And I think that saves so much time, so much money, so much pain. And this idea that there could be something kicking around in there that you don't know about is very scary. And so I'm not even a fan of the unconscious, other than to say the brain automates things you do over and over again. That's what forms your unconscious. They're habits of repetition that you don't need to think about anymore, like driving a car, brushing your teeth, getting dressed. If you have a trauma and you think about it over and over again, you have made it a habit. And then that will go into your unconscious, in the sense that if you habituated a behavior pattern, if somebody comes up to you and looks at you sideways, you're going to be reactive to that person through that habit. but I like to call these repetitive thought processes habits because they're not characterological. They don't mean you're damaged. You can't be damaged. And there is always a way out. And it's not as complicated as sitting on the couch being psychoanalyzed for 10 years. Like, that's old school. That's really old school, but even what we do today, it's not necessary to go back there to see. All you have to do is look at what's going on for you today.
That's good. Related to what you're saying there, I would like to offer that I find some people they keep reliving that painful experience because they keep waiting for a moment when they relive it and it doesn't hurt anymore. Yes. And if that works for somebody, I think that's great. But I see more often where it's not working and they think they're doing it wrong. And I think that's being really unfair of themselves. And that's where we go back to the example that I offered earlier, that if they just gave that pain or that hurt or that disappointment a permanent seat at the table, not expecting it to go away, then they won't run into that sense of, repetitive failure of, darn it, it still hurts. I mean, how could it not hurt? Yeah. Right? Especially, when I think of my parents that have lost children, right? These are grieving parents that are trying to figure out what they are now that they don't have that child in this world anymore, right? That hurts. So it almost feels like the ultimate insult to walk around with the idea that, at some point this won't hurt anymore. It's like, that hurts me thinking about that screwed up, and I'm not blaming them, but that whole belief system is so demented and mean. Yeah. It's really mean. Yeah. And reliving of trauma, the idea that gets anywhere, I definitely have not seen that. I'm not convinced of that. I have clients that are practitioners that host retreats and, Akamal or not Akamal, Tulum, beautiful places in the world. And I'm like, what'd you guys do? Well, first we did the trauma stuff, and I'm just like, okay. And so I akin that to a scab picking. Like, this is a scab that's, it's got something under there, but we're going to pick at that thinking it's doing something. And right. Yeah, you're going to have a lot of emoting for sure. And that may feel like, we're going deep, but going where in that depth when there's another range of them that is not as traumatized by whatever happened and has hope and love and compassion and grace for the part of itself that is in pain.
Yeah.
It's a totally different mindset, totally different approach to growth, to therapy, to healing, to what a retreat is. And gosh, you can have a retreat where all you're doing is laughing and smiling and enjoying yourself and creating the layers that can enjoy life, even though something horrible or bad has happened.
We've created, I think...
There's somewhere to go with that.
There is. And I think we've created a situation where we're afraid of being in denial, right? So we're afraid that if we don't keep churning these things up, that we're denying them. And this is where you get into the closed loop system, right? The more you churn it up, the more it becomes a habit, the more it churns itself up, the deeper in it you get, right? And a lot of this is because we're afraid if we don't churn it, this is the reinforcement, because everything it's a self-reinforcing system. We're afraid we're going to be in denial. And then that's going to cause us more harm down the line. So we have to watch what we've done. It's sort of like the system of, you can't question God, right? It's that same idea. It's this closed loop system. And you say, well, wait, why does God like some of his children more than others of his children? And like, you don't question God. You don't, because now you've become blasphemous and now God's going to smite you because now you're not a favored one, right? So you have to watch the brain with these closed systems that reinforce the inability to question the system. Denial is a very dangerous system that we've created, and I'm just not sure about it. I think we can, there are certain levels of denial. And so I think it's important that there are caveats to all of these things, that pretending that things are not happening to you doesn't help you change your behavior. So that's one thing. If, for instance, if you're just eating donuts every day and you're in denial that these donuts are putting on weight and that it's the donuts, and you think, oh, it has to be something else, it's just my bad genes. I'm not talking about that. That's like denial that prevents you from changing your behavior. But the fear of denial that has you go back and dig, that's something to pay attention to.
Yeah. And this reminds me of the whole, I have a really strong opinion about this. I really don't like the glorification of suffering, that it's somehow more godly the more someone has suffered, and that we're so quick to, in public settings, or I'm just trying to think, so many leaders and speakers, et cetera. It's almost like they lead with their most traumatic experiences. Well, this happened to me. And there's an equating of transcendence with suffering. And that in order to experience transcendence, one must have suffered greatly. And I don't like that story. Number one, I don't think it's true. Number three, I don't think it is. It isn't true.
It's not
I've
true.
proven to myself that it isn't true.
Yeah.
Because my transcendence has nothing, there was no, being at rock bottom. There's no, I couldn't get out of bed. I wanted to die. There's none of that led to my giftedness and my abilities turning on. I was just curious, and there were some different non-suffering situations that happened. So I know I'm an example that I don't have a pain story associated with my transcendence. But it's interesting, Joe, because in the world of spirituality and consciousness, I felt so strange because I knew my abilities were strong, and teachers were reaching out to me as they were a client. And I'm like, well, you've been doing this 20 years. What the heck is going on? Why do you want my help? But then I realized I had something they didn't have, right?
Yeah.
So what I realized as most people that have a gift like this, they have a story that helps explain it, right? I don't have a story. And I remember for years going, this is what is my story? I'm not a recovering alcoholic. I was never suicidal. I'm not depressed. I wasn't almost homeless. I don't have a good story. And then it sort of came to me that is my story, that I don't have a suffering story. That's my story.
That is your story. And I think that the suffering, again, it's a very ingrained, religious element there. Even if you're not religious, it's in the collective consciousness that when you go to a new job, you suffer first. That's what you do. And then you get the payout, right? Or you work for 65 years until you retire and you suffer. And then the pot of gold is at the end. This whole place is about enduring suffering in anticipation of a big payout. That's a very big narrative here that you and I both don't ascribe to. And when I talk about, I rarely, I'm talking about it more, my medical stuff, but I don't talk about it as I don't feel like it's weird to say, but I'm kind of happy it woke me up. It's not, but I don't view it as a trauma. I literally don't. And the traumatic part of my experience was, and it's that relationship with death that I talk about. My beliefs about death were the trauma, not what actually was happening to me. And I found that so fascinating to watch my brain, kind of give me all this grief. And I was like, wait, death? I'm making that up. Nobody's dead and walking around here. So I started reading near-death experiences, and I started just reading all this stuff about different versions of death than the one that I had, and different cultures and religions and whatever who looked at death differently. I was like, why do I have this shitty story, super shitty story about death? And I have to say, it's what didn't deem that as suffering, but it helped me find that it was actually helping me find what was making me suffer. And it was a belief system. It wasn't an illness. It was a belief system. Haven't thought about it like that. It's interesting.
I love that, Jill. So this glorification of suffering and pain, and it's not that we can't put pain and suffering to use. I just use it as making lemonade out of lemons. I would hope that everybody would realize the opportunity and the authority they have to try to make lemonade out of lemons every time we get handed lemons in this reality, whether it's, physical illness or anything. The other part, though, about the pain and suffering narrative is that it's always in the past. It's never something that seemed to happen, like that day or in their current life. It's always related to the past. And they're not letting themselves get beyond that in a healthy, constructive, logical way.
Yeah. The past needs to stay in the past. And really, if you think about it just logically, right, the past doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Just very plain and simple. The only place the past resides, and it doesn't really reside there either, but is in our pulling it back into consciousness. We literally have to go digging for that thing, pulling it back here, and then re-experiencing it now. But it only exists in our mind. And the mind has an amazing fluidity. It has an amazing ability to think something else. And we just don't know that. I don't know why we think our mind is so fixed and our beliefs are so fixed and our identity is so fixed. I don't know how we got here. But all of that is limitation. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating how we've boxed ourselves in. Nobody's boxing us in. We're doing it. And we're using the past mostly to keep that container alive. We're keeping it alive.
Yeah. I'm going to play with this idea here. I haven't worked it all the way through, but I think it can go somewhere nice. It's related to this idea that I play with parents, that I ask them, like, are you a lot like your parent? And they're like, oh, no, like, not at all. If they really, sometimes they say that in a healthy way. Nobody has to be a loser, but they're like, oh, no, I'm really different than my dad or my mom.
Yeah.
But then they're acting as if their child is a mini version of them. And I'm like, well, what if your daughter or your son ends up feeling about you the way that you feel about your parent, which doesn't have to be mean, but just that they are very distinct and separate from who and what you are. And they feel a lot of individuality and authority over what they are, who they are and what they are relative to you. And it's funny how that breaks them. It doesn't break them, but it breaks the spot in their brain of, oh, well, I'm nothing like my parents, but my kids are going to be exactly like me.
Yeah.
Right? And then the other part, that there's so much more going on than what your parents were, and in terms of who and what we are today. And the evidence for that is your siblings. Most of us feel very different than our siblings. Even identical twins will recognize that there are differences and distinguishments between the two identical twins. Yeah. So there's something else going on there. And I would say it's the soulfulness. It's what is animating the physicality, where a lot of the individuality is. Because as your soul, those aren't your parents. As your soul, that isn't your sibling. So there's a whole bunch of individuality and therefore personal authority, greater ability going on there. But so when we can look at that, then all of your siblings, if they were all raised together, they were all raised by those parents. So we aren't only a product of the environment that we were raised in, or how our parents were, or what our parents were for us or not. There's so much more going on there. And some individuals in a family just tend to go, oh yeah, that's screwed up, but I'm okay, right? I wish we had more ability to give young humans, mid humans, older humans, more ability to offer themselves that narrative of that was screwed up, but I'm not screwed up. That situation was a shit show, but I'm not a shit show. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. And I like that. And I think it does speak to when we don't have access to these other layers, or we're not really thinking about these other layers. The problem is we do get stuck with what we got, right? And what we got is not where we're going. It's where we came from. You know, we're using it oddly as a reference point, and you have to just think of this logically, that the past can only, you know, it's the idea that you can't go forward by looking in the rear view mirror. Like, you literally can't do it, right? And so there's this misunderstanding that that's kind of all there is. And as a result, because that's all there is, that's I'm the product of that. And it does cut off all other possibilities for our higher connections, for other possibilities. And honestly, changing the limited, even if you're not excited about where you are in your life, changing the thought about what's available to you, I'm going to say spiritually, existentially, soulfully, wholly, and just tell yourself things like, I can't be cut off from all those layers of me. And even if you're not happy, just say, this can't be all there is. You know, like, if I'm not happy, then why would I come here and do this? There's got to be more. There's always more.
So good.
And that rear view mirror has our necks turned in the wrong direction, and we will never see it. So there's something just very functional about not looking that way.
Yeah. And the line I hear a lot when people are exactly what you're talking about, where they're in that space of their presence going, I don't like where I am, or I don't like where my life is. And then if you talk to them about it, they're like, yeah, I'm working on that. That's from the brain. The brain thinks that it's working on something to get you where you want to be, or more of the life that you want to live. So that's a red flag, and I'll talk more about that. And I want to hear your strategies on that too. The other line I hear is, I haven't found the answer yet. And to me, the trick I want to expose there, of the brain's trick, the brain is tricking them into thinking that there is a solution, or there is a version of themselves or a version of their life that is somehow out there, and they haven't found it yet. But I think that entire thing is flawed. The brain is wrong in that case, because you can't look for what doesn't exist yet. You haven't made that version of you yet. And that version of you that you're not yet, that you want to be, you make him, you make her through trial and maybe some error, a lot of curiosity, a lot of wondering, a lot of experimentation. But the idea that there's some found solution that, oh, I found her. I mean, that's the brain lying to itself.
It is. And it's hubris to think that there's a prepackaged thing, here for me. And I remember when you said that to me, we had a session, right? And you said that to me, and it was like, Jill, you haven't created it yet. And what that did for me was, it stopped. The brain is looking. It's not a creator. You're the creator. The brain is a reactor. So it's looking for something out there to react to, because it's saying reaction is the way you get forward. It's not. Reaction is the way you do what you've always done. Reaction, right? The only way to get forward is to understand this higher is not the right word, but these other layers, to move into this concept, entertain it, that you are a creator. You're not here looking for shit. You're here creating it, right? But that goes back to, how can you be a creator if you're just trying to keep your head above water from all this past and all that gook that you're trying to run away from all the time? It's like quicksand down there, but it does keep you from your creator. It most certainly does, which is the biggest aspect of us. The reactor is the smallest little piece in the brain that is just the smallest little thing. And we live in this little
Yep.
nutshell.
No wonder there are so many individuals trying to get rid of parts of their past or heal it, i.e., it doesn't hurt anymore, it doesn't bother me anymore, etc., because they keep thinking that's what's getting in the way. It isn't getting in
Yeah.
the way. There's there's another version of them that they could create that isn't a problem for.
Yeah.
Right? I want to give an example of this because I remember I'm the youngest of three girls, and I remember wanting really, on a really, really deep need, validation and affirmation. Um, what's another word? I guess those will work, from my sisters, my older sisters. And it was almost like this tap dance kind of thing. Am I good enough to be included in the game yet kind of thing? And I recognized that in a really cringy moment as an adult, going, wow, I don't even want to admit that that's true, but that is going on. I'm looking for the version of me that my sisters will go, okay, yeah, Jill, can you come play with us now? We won't leave you out this time.
Yeah.
We want you to be with us, right? And once I realized that, I was like, okay, number one, I don't like feeling that way. Number two, I may never get that from them. And then it was like, oh my God. Okay. So then it was almost like some kind of like a brain cage, kind of like unlatched. And I was like, okay, so I don't even have to think about that anymore or work on that anymore. And I can instead be a version of me that I'm happy with, that I'm satisfied by, that I would want to play with.
Exactly.
Right? And I had so much more freedom and liberation
Beautiful.
there, right? And a healthy detachment from some adult siblings that I don't have a lot in common with. We're not close. And that was okay, because I didn't need to be chasing them around looking for their approval. That's the word I was looking for.
I have to
approval.
say,
Anyway, such a cringy little example, but it's so real.
I did the same thing. I went out on a mission I was just like, bring it. I want all the stuff that's dragging me down. I want the good, the bad, and the ugly of me, right? And so I was like cleaning the cobwebs out of stuff that I just stuffed back there. I'm like, I didn't want to see, right? So to your point with the cringy, I would want to like kind of go into my psyche and pull out the things that would make me like, like that is a gross thought about me. I was trying to like just pull out all the cringiest things I thought about me, anybody else has ever thought about me. I just pulled them all out. And then, at the end, I was like, I'm still standing. It was this real, like, it's sort of like facing your demons in a funny way. But if it didn't make me sick to my stomach saying it about myself, I'm like, that's not it. That's not it. Go deeper. It's not like you wear ugly clothes or these are some cringy, I don't even want to talk about them in public, but just to you, like how I would use people in relationships, or how I, I was such a selfish person when I was younger. It was just all about me, and just, it goes on and it goes deeper and it gets ugly. But I loved it, because once I did that, to your point, there's a liberation in not having to have all these workarounds in your mind to maintain a persona that everything's okay, right? It could be like, yeah, I did that. I really did that, and just kind of be okay with yourself. And it's a great exercise. And I even recommend it to people who are feeling really shitty about themselves, because that even, it's not when you're feeling good about yourself just to pull out the shit. The reason you're feeling shitty about yourself is because these things are there lurking and you don't want them to be. So you could do it anytime, is my point.
I love that. And to me, this isn't, I don't think we're contradicting ourselves. We're not saying go into your past. We're saying go into yourself. The layers of you that are living and operating today, maybe, in the shadows of yourself, that if you can get comfortable with your own
Yes.
cringiness and be ready to offer it love, not criticism, right? So then you're not afraid of what you see,
Yes.
right? I would add to that for myself, I had to create a layer of Jill that could be comfortable being wrong, right? That I was like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Like, oh, I can't look, to thank God I'm not her anymore. You know what I mean? Giving her love and being able to come up with rationalizations for why I was the way I was, anything like that. But just if you can open up it's almost like imagining that you're an orb of energy and you're letting that orb, that sphere, the orbital be big enough to handle all the layers of you that are looking maybe for approval or love or validation or just compassion that, okay, we were doing the best we could with what we knew, but thank God we know better
Yeah.
now, right? But if I'm not willing to look at that cringe, the cringy Jills in myself, then I'm not willing to be real with who and what I am and the range of what we all are. I think I'm more compassionate towards others when they're acting cringy, in my opinion, too. I'm like,
Yeah.
good, I know
I
that.
think that I do the same in terms of the cringe, right? When you get in touch with your cringe, I think you do become a lot more compassionate because when you could say, and this is an exercise I use, but it helps me so much to, if somebody is doing something and my brain wants to like attack them for doing it, or don't they know better? They shouldn't be behaving that way. I say, I always do this under the exact same circumstances. I would be doing the exact same thing. And when I do that, it's just a brain breaker. You don't have to get philosophical about it. It really doesn't matter. I'm using it to break my brain, to get it out of that. I'm not that, you are. And that judgmental place, which we
Mm.
use to puff ourselves up. We use other people's transgressions and things to make us feel better about ourselves. And it's because we're trying to overcompensate for all this gunk that's lurking in the background. So when you bring the gunk to the foreground and you can just say, under the exact same circumstances, I would be doing that, then you have compassion for that person. And interestingly, when you have compassion for that person, it's reflexive and you feel the compassion for yourself. And it's a really, really interesting way in.
Mm.
And again, don't go into any detail. This is not a brain exercise. It's a brain breaking exercise. So no
Mm-mm.
rationalizations. No, I would never do that
That's
under
good.
those circumstances. That's the brain just
Right.
taking you, trying to, again, it's overcompensating for what's in the past toilet.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love this, Jill. I just feel this is so useful. I feel like these are our best
Yeah.
tricks for being a loving, compassionate, wise person related to the past and getting beyond our past. And that the past, yeah, there's a lot here. Gosh, people may want to re-listen and
I
take notes
have,
and really consider that for themselves. I guess one thing
I was going to ask you,
what was
like,
that?
what about other people's pasts, right? Because this is one area where we're pretty sticky also. And I don't want to close before we, maybe noodle this for a
Hmm.
hot sec, because
Okay.
we believe other people are their past. We believe that if somebody's done something, they're going to do that thing
Mm.
again. We don't let people change from their past. And that's why we don't let ourselves change
Mm.
from our past, right? So if you're going to let go of your past, you have to let go of other
Interesting.
people's past with discernment, but with the eye for seeing something new, right? Curiosity rather than, oh, here we go again.
Mm.
I know what's going to happen. That's the brain reliving that person's history and probably your relationship history with that person. Right. So that's another area to just be very, very mindful of, is if you're tying other people to their history, you are tied to yours.
Oh, that's interesting. It's funny because I want to play devil's advocate with that in the way that if somebody is self-sabotaging, or they just have patterns that where they get in their own way of being, a loving, caring, um, high achieving kind of version of themselves. And you could, if it's like a sibling or something like that, you can see a pattern that they've had that you could observe that in them throughout their lives and they still have it. I guess I want to defend the fact that because I'm like, I do that, but I don't feel I'm doing it as that person can't change. I'm just saying that, oh, I have a better understanding of why they maybe are having a harder time in their life because they haven't allowed their own transcendence to create new patterns, right? And there is some mental illness in this situation of this person, but it's tricky. So I don't want to be using anyone's past against them, but I don't feel like we need to ignore someone's past. It's just don't give it the weight of preventing them from being a transcendent, evolved version of
Right.
themselves. Is
It
that
is
is that
fair. I
fair,
think,
Dr.
look,
Jill?
I think patterns are something that you and I always look for, right? Patterns helps us understand that somebody is in a
Yeah.
brain loop, right? And I have respect for the brain loops, the sort of addictive processes that go along with that. It is very hard to be on a roller coaster and jump off it midstream, right? That's super hard. And that's really what
Yeah.
we're espousing, in a weird way, is that it takes a lot of effort to get off that loop. So I honor people where they are. I'm not saying that, I think even in your case, for example, there is always the openness that something new can happen. I don't ever get that sense that you shut that down. You're not developing expectations of people.
Okay.
Expectations and demands are different,
Yeah.
right? So there's this always, the door is always open, but I will always meet you where you are. I can't get you off your loop. I can only get myself off my loop. And when I see someone else in a loop, I have compassion for their loop and for my loops, because nobody is free of these things. Nobody, whether it's, eating or relationships, we've all got these things we just can't break out of, right? So the difference is, I'm not going to go in and I'm not going to say, I expect you to behave differently because I'm throwing out your past. Surprise me, right? I'm doing you a favor. Surprise me with your newness.
That's such a great
right?
example.
That's not, that, yeah.
Okay,
right.
You're free.
So that's, there's a lot of compassion in here, which we talked about. There's a lot of seeing other people's patterns without judging those patterns, recognizing, because we can't get off of our loops, how hard it would be for somebody to get off theirs. And I always tell people, don't ask somebody else to do something you're not willing to do. If you see someone in a loop, find a loop that you have in yourself. Find an addictive pattern. I don't care if it's coffee. Find something that you're doing that you rationalize you don't have to stop, or that you can't stop, and fix that before you go and fix anybody else's situation, right? Always don't ask a kid to do something. If you're asking your kid to sit down and pay attention in class and be nice to other people or whatever. I once had a client and her complaint was her kids, they weren't doing their homework and they don't listen, and it was a nightmare. And so I said, as the call went on, I'm like, I have homework for you. I'm going to give you some homework. It was enough separate, but I'm like, I'm going to give you some homework. The next time I got together with her, I said, did you do your homework? And she's like, no, I didn't have time. I didn't, whatever. All the excuses her kids used. I gave her homework. She didn't do it. You can't ask somebody to do what you're not willing to do. That's hypocrisy. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but it's a good one.
No, I feel like it does relate in there because it's, I feel like it may not be related to getting beyond our past, but it is we were in the topic of loop programs, which is going to be a recurring theme in the Psych podcast, because they dictate so much of what we do, and some of it is very unthoughtful. So
love it.
Nice.
It does feel like
feels like a wrap.
The past is gone.
Agree? I like it. Past is
You are
gone. You are
free.
free to be the you that you want to be in trial and error. Make her, make
Be your
him.
best self, right?
Let it be messy. Let your brain be totally freaked out that at the risk. Oh my God, the brain's like, I don't know what that means. Yeah, huh?
Yeah.
That's a good sign.
And you know,
Let's
there
see
are a
what
lot of
happens.
nuggets in here. I think the
Jazz
thing about
hands.
you and I is we just lay it all out on the table. So I think it's nice to, if you have to listen to this and pause for a minute, definitely do, because you don't want the brain to kind of like move on to the next thing and dismiss the thing, you know, that was said before, because there's just a lot of value in all the different perspectives and the way that you can work with this. And it's not just a listen. It's a listen and try, you know, take it out for a test drive.
Exactly. Try it out for yourself and take notes. If you're the type of person that likes structure and organization, obviously that isn't how we presented this information for you. So listen to it again and take you use, create your own ahas, your big takeaways, and what you want them to mean for you, not what they do mean for you, because that's a brain exercise. What do you want them to mean for you? That's a
And
creative
I
exercise. That's
think
beyond your
that
brain.
don't go sharing it. I mean, share the podcast, please, but don't go. A lot of times what people do is they hear
Yeah.
something good and they want to help a friend out before they've tried it on. You try it on first, see what you think, and then if you've had like a good success with something, then you have the ability to share from your experience what, you know, it's almost like you have clout now. It's not clout coming from you and I before you've tried it on for yourself. So it has to go through that process. All right. I think I'm done.
Great advice. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time. We have a lot of episode topics that are really, really yummy, and we're psyched about those. So thanks for tuning in again, and thanks for sharing this. Thanks for liking. Thanks for leaving a review if you liked it. Those really help a new podcast get started and catch on. Thank you.